Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep producing quality content for you. Now let's get into today's summary of events for April 12, 2026. Today, both sides of the conflict reported isolated violations of the Easter ceasefire. Russia's Ministry of Defense recorded several attempts by Ukrainian armed forces to advance on certain sections of the front, all of which were successfully repelled. Assessing the situation as a whole, based on incoming figures and information directly from the front line, it can be stated that the ceasefire is broadly holding. Individual incidents are occurring, but they are not affecting the configuration of the front. It appears that soldiers on both sides are marking the holiday in relative calm. The situation in the air is telling. Strike drones are completely absent over the territories of Ukraine and Russia today. An unspoken moratorium on the use of combat drones is in effect. This in itself speaks volumes about how seriously both sides are treating the ceasefire. At the same time, reconnaissance UAVs are operating at an intensified pace along the entire front line, from Kherson to the northernmost part of the Sumy region. They are tracking regroupings, recording reinforcements in some areas and withdrawals from others. Aerial reconnaissance today is the primary tool for monitoring ceasefire compliance and simultaneously preparing for its conclusion. The Russian side has clearly and unambiguously stated its position. Once the Easter ceasefire ends, Russia's armed forces will resume combat operations along the entire front line until the objectives set in 2022 are fully achieved. The key sticking point remains the approximately 17–19% of Donetsk Oblast still under Ukrainian control. Russia describes the withdrawal of Ukrainian units from these territories as an indispensable condition for any settlement. The front line, what changed over the holiday? Sumy direction. Before the Easter ceasefire began, Russian units improved their positions in the area of Myropolska and consolidated there firmly. The map on this axis had been shifting since April 8th, Russian forces gradually advancing, and by the evening of April 12th, control over Myropolsk can be considered established. Units are currently continuing to filter further west and southwest, using the relative lull of the ceasefire to consolidate on new lines. After the ceasefire ends, Russia will apparently begin moving toward Uroyedi from the north and northeast. This direction is not yet attracting wide attention, but it may be the scene of one of the first active phases once the holiday period concludes. Kharkiv direction. Video materials are emerging from the area of the settlement of Veterinan, documenting the presence of Russian servicemen in woodland areas north of the village. The advance apparently began before the Easter ceasefire. Pro-Ukrainian cartographers have already prepared an almost complete correction for this direction. Though official maps have not yet been updated, in the near term, Veterinan will likely be fully marked as Russian-controlled. It is currently difficult to determine definitively whether this reflects the activity of sabotage and reconnaissance groups in a grey zone or the beginning of a more large-scale advance. Nevertheless, it is possible that this is the first step toward Kozacza Lopan, a settlement north of Kharkiv that was under Russian control in 2022 before being abandoned during the withdrawal. A potential resumption of pressure on this axis would send a serious signal regarding the defense of Kharkiv as a whole. Kupiansk direction. Almost no information arrived from this section during the Easter ceasefire period. The situation remained stable, with no significant changes recorded. Sloviansk direction. Before the ceasefire began, Russian units managed to significantly improve their positions in the areas of Dibrova and Rai-Oleksandrivka. By the time the Easter ceasefire started, part of Rai-Oleksandrivka had effectively found itself in semi-encirclement. It is critically important for Russia to straighten the front line along the Dibrova, Rai-Oleksandrivka axis and advance toward Dibrova, north of the Siversky Donets River. From those positions, assault operations toward the Sloviansk agglomeration, one of the largest urban targets on this section of the front, are planned to begin. A sharp intensification of combat is expected here from April 13th, and this direction risks becoming one of the key axes of fighting in the coming weeks. Kostiantynivka. Fighting for the city has been ongoing since November 2025, yet over nearly half a year, November, December, January, February, March, and most of April, The front line around the city's perimeter has barely moved. The Ukrainian side has held its positions despite constant pressure. Under these circumstances, Russia has apparently decided to radically change its approach and shift to encircling the city on its flanks, rather than applying frontal pressure on the perimeter. On the southwestern flank, in the area of Nova Balka and Roskoshin, movement has already begun. Before the ceasefire, Russian units secured a foothold on the southern outskirts of Nova Balka. Tomorrow, an intensification of pressure is expected, aimed at reaching the northern outskirts and farms in the Roskoshin area. This flank is gradually becoming the primary thrust on the Kostiantynivka section, and how it develops in the coming days will be instructive. On the northeastern flank, in the space between Chasiv Yar and Kostiantynivka, the situation is considerably more difficult. The entire territory represents an extensive system of fortified strongpoints of the Ukrainian armed forces, with a high concentration of troops and equipment. Breaking through to Novodnitrivka and the northeastern part of Kostiantynivka has not yet been achieved. Without control over this space, it is virtually impossible to reliably count on intercepting Highway H20, Kramatorsk, Kostiantynivka, the key supply artery for Ukrainian units in this sector. Before attempting to advance in this direction, Russia apparently intends to first consolidate along the line Verolyubivka, Popasne, Bezimene, Klinova. Even before Easter began, experts noted growing Russian activity in the Verolyubivka area, north of the Chasiv Yar, Kramatorsk railway. Establishing control over this section would allow Russia to hold Highway H20 more reliably and significantly complicate the supply of Ukrainian units positioned in the pocket east of Kostiantynivka. It appears that particularly intense fighting for this pocket is imminent. Dobrovolsk direction, the situation is stable. No map corrections or video materials have been reported. It appears that the ceasefire is being fully observed on this section, and no escalation is expected here in the near term. Zaporizhzhia direction, one of the most tense sections heading into the holidays. As recently as yesterday, pro-Ukrainian sources reported the transfer of at least 50 units of equipment to the Huliai Poli area, a so-called Easter regrouping. The scale of the transfer directly points to serious preparations for escalation as early as April 13th. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups have already filtered around the perimeter of Verkhnya Tersa and Huliai Polske. Both settlements are effectively encircled. Formally, supply via certain dirt roads is still maintained, but the freedom of maneuver for Ukrainian units in this area is already extremely limited. Verkhnya Tersa, Huliai Polska, and Voskresenka represent the last serious defensive line on the way to the Orikhiv agglomeration. Should these settlements be lost, Russian units would have open operational space to the southwest with no significant natural or fortified obstacles. The situation of Orikhiv itself is already extremely vulnerable. The city has effectively been drawn into semi-encirclement, and a natural water barrier further complicates logistics for Ukrainian units. This is the most unfavorable defensive position imaginable, and it grows more difficult with each passing day. Northern Zaporizhzhia direction. In February-March 2026, Ukraine actively counterattacked from the direction of the Vovcha River, from the Pokrovske and Velika Mikhailivka area toward Uspinivka. Around early March, the offensive stalled and ran out of steam, after which Russia launched a counterattack. According to information received today, before the Easter ceasefire began, Russian units fully restored control over the villages of Berezovy and Ternov and continue to advance. During the ceasefire itself, according to Russia's Ministry of Defense report, Ukrainian forces launched several counterattacks in the Otradne area, all of them repelled. Further video materials will be monitored to clarify the actual picture on this section. The strategic window, a month between Easter and the May holidays, approximately 1 month opens up, during which Russia intends to maximally improve its positions on key axes. This period is free of major domestic political events, and the military command apparently intends to make full use of it. After the May holidays conclude, within 2 to 3 weeks, there is a high probability of Russia either announcing new terms for a peace settlement or transitioning to a more large-scale offensive on several axes simultaneously. This timing directly intersects with a statement made by Zelensky several days ago. According to him, Russia gave Ukraine a 2-month deadline to decide on withdrawing troops from the remaining portions of Donetsk Oblast. Both of those months fall precisely on the Easter and May holiday periods. In other words, the military and diplomatic deadlines are synchronized, and once they expire, the situation may change dramatically. Hungarian elections, the diplomatic front. While a military ceasefire holds in Ukraine, a political battle is unfolding in Hungary that could directly influence the further course of the war. Today's parliamentary elections are seeing historically record turnout. By 9 a.m., approximately 17% of voters had already cast their ballots, compared to 10% at the same time during the 2022 elections, nearly a third higher. By 1 p.m., turnout had already reached 54%. Hungarian elections have not seen such electoral activity in decades. Society clearly recognizes the historical significance of what is taking place. The stakes are extraordinarily high and are directly tied to the Ukrainian conflict. A victory for incumbent Prime Minister Orbán, with high probability, means Ukraine will not receive a $90 billion credit needed to finance its army and economy. Without these funds, the continuation of full-scale combat operations becomes extremely difficult in the foreseeable future. A victory for the opposition, Ukraine would likely receive its first tranches as early as June, providing funding for at least 2 more years of war and fundamentally altering the balance of power on the negotiating track. The alignment of support looks paradoxical. Orbán is openly backed by the United States, while Russia does so tacitly, aware of the toxicity of direct statements for Hungarian voters. The opposition is supported by the European Union and Ukraine. This is an exceptionally rare historical instance of Washington and Moscow effectively working toward the same political outcome in a European country. Orbán himself has already stated that immediately after the election results are announced, Ukraine will resume oil pumping through the Druzhba pipeline, transparently hinting that the pipeline was deliberately shut down to destabilize his position on the eve of the vote. Electoral support for Orbán was expressed by the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The outline of a possible southeastern coalition comprising Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and potentially Bulgaria is gradually taking shape, a bloc of states capable of consistently advancing certain interests within the EU while balancing between Brussels and Washington. Preliminary results are expected this evening, and warnings are already being sounded about possible street unrest in Budapest, regardless of the outcome. The Strait of Hormuz, a new flashpoint. Talks between U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and the Iranian side in Pakistan ended in deadlock. More than 20 hours of negotiations produced no result whatsoever. The parties failed to reach agreement on Iran's non-nuclear status, on unblocking the Strait of Hormuz, or on any interim arrangement. Vance left the region empty-handed and headed to the United States with a stopover at Ramstein Air Base. Almost immediately after his departure, Trump began posting statements on social media. The substance of all the posts amounts to one thing. The United States is announcing a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade will be implemented in waters south of Pakistan, beyond the reach of Iranian missiles, which have a range of approximately 300 kilometers from the coastline. Everything exiting the strait is planned to be intercepted. Trump also threatened additional punitive measures against ship owners and companies that dare to pay Iran for passage through the strategic waterway. The critical issue here is the question of payment currency. Iran announced it will accept payment for passage exclusively in yuan or cryptocurrency, categorically refusing dollars. For the United States, this is an unacceptable precedent. Payments for oil outside the dollar system undermine one of the fundamental pillars of American financial dominance. This is precisely why the blockade carries not only a military political, but also a deeply economic character. Iran responded with equal firmness. It demanded that the US pay reparations and declared the right to detain American and Israeli vessels and sell them, effectively announcing state piracy in international waters. Alarming signals are already emerging about an incident in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait off the coast of Yemen. A vessel reportedly came under attack and an attempted boarding. This location is one of the narrowest and most vulnerable points on global trade routes, where any incident immediately affects world prices. For now, the United States is limiting itself to the blockade and refraining from direct missile strikes on Iranian territory. The key question of the coming days: will Iran begin asymmetric strikes on Gulf states, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait? If so, the blockade will lose its purpose, oil will continue to become more expensive, and the dissatisfaction of US allies in the region will only intensify. Financial markets are currently closed, but analysts are already forecasting a rise in oil prices to $110–120 per barrel by the end of the week, provided the situation does not change dramatically in the coming hours.